Here. And welcome to this webinar about open data sharing for the agri-food sector. My name is Bente Lilja. I'm going to be your host today. I'm one of the organizers of the Nairobi Inspire Hackathon, and this webinar is part of the series that we are organizing in the hackathon, but it is open for everybody. Welcome here. While we are waiting for people to enter into the room, we are doing some weather reports. This is a signature from my webinars, and then we will start the program. So first of all, we will do some weather reports, and I start with you, Raul.
Yes, so here in Poznan we have 20 degrees and sunny.
Sounds very nice. Here in Norway, it's, I don't know how many degrees, 5 degrees, and rather sunny. It's perfect spring weather here. In order for you for us to get to know you, and in order for you to warm up with the chat, because we want you to use the chat box to ask questions today, please let us know your name, where you're from, and a tiny little weather report would be awesome. So we have that going on, and then some housekeeping before we start. First of all, we will end this webinar very precisely at 2:30. And before we end there, you will get an introduction from Raul on the topic. He will present some ideas, and you will in between be more than welcome. We will really encourage you to ask questions. There are two ways for you to ask questions. One is in the chat box. So right, whenever you pop up questions when you're listening to Raul, for instance, write it in the chat box so we can pick it up after he has done his presentation. Then a second way of interacting with us and engaging in the discussion is actually to enter into the room. There are some requirements for that. You need a fast internet, you need a Chrome browser, you need a webcam, and a headset. If you have that, you can just raise your hand. You see there's a hand in one of the icons. If you raise your hand, I will be able to invite you in the room. So with that, I think we can start the program. It will be packed with information today. So Raul, can you introduce yourself first a little bit more, and then start the presentation?
Okay, so thank you, Bente. So my name is Raul Palma. I am from Poznan Supercomputing and Networking Center in Poland. I am here the Semantic Technologies Coordinator, and I am also leading all the activities related to the agri-food sector in my organization. And I am also one of the members of Plan for All organization, and particularly I am leading the part of open data in Plan for All. And yeah, so today webinar is about open data and sharing data. I will start with my presentation, and if you have some questions, you can start with the chat, and Bente will help us to organize this. So.
Yes, absolutely. I will follow on the chat, and I will say hi there so you see where the chat is, perhaps. And we will, our faces will disappear, but we will return back, I can assure you.
Okay, so this is the team mentors or the main people involved in this team of the hackathon. So it's me and my colleague from PSNC, Poznan Supercomputing and Networking Center. We have someone from Africa, Esther. We have also Runar from Norway, Karel Harbat from Czech Republic, and Raitis, and also Simon are from Czech Republic. Just quickly introduce the project that is supporting these activities is called DataBio. So DataBio aims at showcasing the benefits of big data in the raw material production, particularly from agriculture and other bioeconomy industry sectors, but we are focusing here on the agriculture domain. This is coming and DataBio is kind of getting information or getting some results from previous projects like Foodie and SDI for apps. So what is the objective of this team? basically we want to explore available data sources and data sharing practices in the agri-food sector that are, let's say, used, especially with the focus, of course, in Africa, Kenya, and in this area. So we want to identify catalogs, standards, and data models that will work in Africa. We want to identify existing data sharing practices and how they can apply in Africa. And we want to implement mechanisms for data sharing that can facilitate the integration task. And finally, this is very important, we want to implement interfaces for visualizing the integrated data. So what is data sharing? Basically, data sharing refers to the practice of making the data generated during the different stages of the agricultural production available to other parties. You know, particularly in digital farming, there is a lot of data being generated by many different partners in the agri-food chain. So the idea is how we can make this data available. So why is it important, or why we are talking about this data sharing in agri-food? There is a growing interest in improving the data sharing because this is the way that we can really fully realize an era of digital farming. So access to this accurate agricultural data is vital to develop digital farming and to support farmers and other cooperatives and other stakeholders in order to produce more with less resources. This is actually coming from the EU Code of Conduct on the agri data sharing, so you can have an idea that how important this is. So in order to fully obtain the benefits of the digital farming and sharing the data between the partners must be conducted in fair and transparent way. Otherwise, people will not be sharing. That's one of the main difficulties in getting the people to share. And of course, granting access to the necessary data will facilitate and accelerate data-driven business models. So which data do we have in agri-food? Of course, we are talking about many different types of data here, including farm data, like, farm operations, farm characteristics, and so on, but also production yield and so on. Then we have, of course, machinery data, meteorological data, air supply data, geospatial data, statistical data, and some other related data that is somehow relevant for the agri-food sector. Of course, you might know some others, and this is something that is interesting for us to discuss as well. So what data sources are available? In Europe, for example, the countries should make available some data. It has to be open, some data. For example, the LPIS, the Land Parcel Information System data. This gives you particular specific information about the parcels in the land of each of the countries. So then we can, of course, identify the particular plots and what kind of crops are in there and so on. But some other countries, or some countries in Europe, for example, that this is where we are, let's say, having more experience. They also have some open data available. For example, in the Czech Republic, there are information about soil maps, erosion zone, water bodies, and similar for Poland. But what is available in Kenya, in Africa? What about the standards? There are so many standards used for the representation of the data. For example, if we talk about geospatial data, you have shapefiles, GML. If we are talking about farm data, normally this is stored in some relational databases, some CSV, but is there some standard? Not necessarily, because in the relational database, they don't have their own schema, for example. Or, for example, if they are using solutions for some provider, they have their own, in many cases, closed solution. So the same for machinery data, although, for example, ISOBOS is one of the standards. We have statistical data and others like JSON and RDF. So there are important, let's say, catalogs and thesauries and models available. For example, in the agri-food particularly, we have AgroXML, AgroRDF, AgroBook. This is very famous from FAO. We also have food ontology, that is one of our results and something that we are pushing very much in Europe in order to make it kind of a standard for farm data. But also there are models for each of the types of domains or related domains that I was mentioning, like weather, IoT, statistical data, and so on. So what about the data sharing practices? Basically, we have here two things to discuss. First, there is a kind of code of conduct from EU that was agreed between a coalition of associations that are stakeholders, relevant stakeholders in the agri-food sector. And these are some of the main topics or main areas that they discuss in this code of conduct. I will, of course, leave these slides later for you to go more in details if you want. This code of conduct also established, for example, what should a data sharing contract establish? What kind of checklist you should verify before you start sharing or using data that is shared. So all of this is very important when we start to talk about sharing data. But finally, this is also another important practice that it's called FAIR. FAIR is something that has actually been created or is being used in scientific domains. But in fact, some of the principles can also be applied to the agri-food sector itself. So FAIR is referring to making the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And for each of these, let's say, aspects, we have like a kind of a checklist, how to make it happen. But this is, like I said, was created for scientific domains, but it can actually apply as well for the agri-food. So this is the first part, the introduction. I don't know if you have any questions so far. We can make a quick stop here.
Yes, thank you, Raul. It's indeed a general challenge to share data, and some of the data are easier than others. And but in general, in situ data, so ground-based data, is definitely of high value, both to improve the satellite data and also in general to have better information about higher resolution information. I think you can unshare your screen also, Raul, so they can see us quite clearly. So here is where we would like you to ask some questions. If you have some questions to Raul, tell us just perhaps what your background is, or your particular interest in this field. I think that will be very helpful for Raul to know. And
after this, I would like to start just talking about some, how we can actually make this happen and so on. So if you don't have, particular questions at the moment, we can leave it for later.
Leave it to later. Yes, I think we do that. Ask the questions and we can take it later. Go ahead and take the next step, Raul.
Okay, so let me just go back here. Can you see my screen?
It's coming. And you put it in presentation mode as well, perhaps?
Yes. Can you see the screen? No?
It's coming again.
Okay, give me a second. I think I will do it again.
Yeah.
Okay, now it should be.
It's coming. I will tell you when it's ready. And there it is. Go ahead.
Okay, so now with that introduction, so how we can actually start sharing and opening the data. So of course we can use some kind of data sharing index portals. You can see that there are some international portals, for example, at the level of EU, or there are some national portals. There are some domain-specific portals, and so on. So there are many, let's say, portals available for sharing data. But the problem is that portals allow you to find and download the data sets. They, of course, give some metadata about the data sets. Some of them give you even interfaces for visualizing data, but not all of them, so just some of them. And if the data is accessible elsewhere, the portals may provide a link to view or download endpoints like WMS and so on. But this is really not the best way to make the data reusable, or like, going into this FAIR that I was mentioning before. Generally, data cannot be directly reused, like query, explore it. Data cannot be directly integrated with other data sets. And relation between the data elements remain hidden. There are many other things in this direction. So that's why we are usually adopting the linked data approach to share and publish data. So we use linked data as a federated ledger with, of course, access control mechanism in order to enable the opening and the sharing of the data. So linked data is actually becoming very popular method for publishing data on the web because it improves accessibility and also enables to discover more useful data through the links and to the exploitation with semantic queries. So there is a growing number of data sets available as linked data, but actually in the agri-food domain, there is not that many. So it's important. So what is linked data itself? It's a simple set of principles and technologies. It gives you that you need to use URIs to identify data elements and data sets. You need to use HTTP for protocol for transference. You need to use RDF for representation of the data. You need to use SparkQL for querying the data. And it establishes some steps, like how first you identify the data sets, then you need to identify the model to represent these data sets. Then you need to generate RDF data, which is how you actually generate the representation of the data in a format compatible with linked data. Then you make the linking, and finally, you make the exploitation, the interfaces. So we have made this implementation of linked data using kind of pipelines for publication in Agri-Food. And we have done this for many, many different types of data sources, like geospatial data, statistical data, farm data, and so on. And we follow a set of steps like pre-processing data, analysis of the data to specify the model, to make the mappings. Then we do the transformation, generation of the RDF, do some post-processing if necessary. We do the linking, the publication, and the exploitation with some interfaces. So this is available, many pipelines are available already. And we use many technologies in order to do that you can actually see later on as well in more detail. So going a little bit with some examples here. We talk about this foodie model that I was talking before. Foodie model, for example, was created in order to represent farm data. It was actually created as an extension or as in compliance with the Inspire models, which is one of the important standards, at least at European level. And also in compliance with ISO and OGC standards for geographical information. Originally, this was created as a UML model. So what we did was first to transform this model into an ontology, basically, that is like the underlying model for linked data, like the ontology. We did this transformation, and then we started to generate the RDF data. So in order to generate the RDF data, we used D2RQ, GeoTriples, R2ML processors, and depending on the data source, because if it's relational database, it's different. If it's CSV files, or if it's JSON files, or if it's shape files, and so on. And then important to say that in order to do the generation of RDF, you can do this in two ways. One is on the fly. That means that the data remains in the place that it's stored, and then you just put a layer that do the mapping on the fly and transform the data in RDF. Or you can do it offline. For example, if the data is static and you don't change that much, so you just transform everything to RDF and just put it into a triple store. Then we create the links of the data generated as RDF. So there are different tools to discover these links. And then finally, we start working with the interfaces for visualizing. So here are some examples of how you can visualize the data that is available as linked data. And also the important thing here is that you can see many data sets together, so integrated. And this is another way. For example, in Karel's teams, for example, they work a lot with creating maps in order to visualize the data. And they are doing this with HS Layer, which is one of the interfaces that I showed before here on the left side. So this is HS Layer. And in this case, for example, maps can also be composed. So you can have many sources in one map, and then you can share this map. Yeah. So for example, here, this is an example for Czech Republic, having data for many different data sources. You can see here what are the catalog of all the maps available in one of the websites of the Czech Republic. You can see more information of this catalog. And then once you select one map, you can share it even in the social media, and then anybody can open and see exactly what you are seeing. And you can also share it with via QGIS, which is one of the most commonly used tools for manipulating geospatial data. It's a free tool. So you can also share it with QGIS, and everybody can work with that. Okay. So I think that's a brief introduction of the methods that we are using and how we are proposing to follow approach that we are proposing to follow. So now is the questions, and this is how I leave it to discussion, how you can contribute. So these are some open questions for you, like how to identify some, help us to identify some data sources in Kenya, in Africa, help us to identify models and vocabularies that are used there to represent this data in agri-food. Help us to identify or collect information about the data sharing practices used in Africa, and to define some scenarios and use cases for the open data and data sharing. Maybe you can contribute to extend the data models. Maybe you can also contribute with new data sharing platforms, or to the implementation of some interfaces for visualizing, including maps. Any other ideas, of course, are welcome. So this is where I leave it, and I take any questions and suggestions and discussion.
Yes. Super interesting. We have so many data resources, not only, well, for Africa, it's around the world, and making it work together is really a challenge. But there's so much value to be harvested from that. So I see that I think it would be very, very useful for us in this team to know what topics that would be of interest to you. You don't have to write a thesis on it. You could just give us some keywords in the chat. That would be very helpful in itself. And I can perhaps, so the foodie data that you were talking about, Raul, that is also that's available from a platform from Plan for All. But it's also available, yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, the foodie model is available as it's an open resource. It's in GitHub actually, but it's one of GitHub. Yeah, but it's one of the models that is maintained and supported by Plan for All, and through also the different projects that we are involved. Yeah, so for example, at the moment, the project that is mainly supporting this is Data Bio, but it's at the end the umbrella could be Plan for All. Yeah.
Yes, and I know since I'm involved in NextGeos, the next generation data hub, European data hub, and cloud platform, not only cloud platform. We have cataloged these foodie data. So so Plan for All, which is the organization. The main organizer of the Nairobi Inspire Hackathon, Plan for All has 3 data sets that are being managed by Plan for All, but they are making the data sets available, as you said, Raul, in different projects. But also you can find it and explore it, if you like, on NextGeos Data Hub. So I don't know if maybe we should provide a link to that so they can, just have a look at it. In the chat, I will find a link to the NextGeos Data Hub, and so they can see where, explore how it works with open data, because this is the reason why you can find the data various different channels, and I think this is what we want to achieve, that the data that are being provided and produced are easily accessible. This is a very shy audience, Raul. So if you prefer to raise your hand and enter the room, you are more than welcome. So we get to know you this way, or you can simply write a message in the or a comment or question in the chat box.
Here is a link to the foodie information. I mean, this is an agro portal. This is general collecting information about models in agri-food sector. And foodie model is there, of course. And then you can see also links the GitHub that I was mentioning, because
Right.
there is not the latest one, but if you go to GitHub, you will find.
Right. Right. Yes. So you can have a look there. If I guess what would be the level of expertise that you would like to have on the team?
Well,
You
I mean,
mentioned a lot of different levels, but
different topics, yeah. So that's why, because we are very open, right? So this is we can have people that are very, let's say, in the agri domain, like agronomists or this kind of people that work with the real agri data. And then because their knowledge can be very useful in terms of identifying data sets, models, and catalogs that work in Africa. So, right? So this or data sharing practices in the Agri-Food in their domain. So agronomists, for example, this can be, or anybody else with this knowledge of the agri domain is
right. So
important.
they don't have to have this detailed knowledge about. You mentioned a lot of acronyms there of the different standards.
Yes,
Actually, just knowing the agricultural field
yes,
would be
exactly.
useful
So
information.
this is one profile. Of course,
Yeah.
another profile is some more technical people that can have more background in development of web applications, for example, to do some portals, to do some interfaces for visualizations, working with maps, that kind of things is another profile. And the
Yeah.
third profile, I would say, is more on the semantic web